Hey everyone, I'm Kareem, the Alumni Officer at CIBS, and welcome to CIBS Connect, a brand new interview series which will cover insightful topics including experiences within finance, diversity and inclusion, application tips, and many, many more. And today I'm delighted to be joined by our first ever guest on the series, Matthew Coakes, a Managing Director at RBC, who heads Energy and EMEA and is the co-head of Broking. So Matthew, how are you doing today?
Good to meet you, Kareem. Yeah, pleasure to be here. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to hear. So, first question off the bat really is that I noticed that you studied a master's degree in engineering at Cambridge. So, coming from a STEM background, what initially sparked your interest in investment banking generally, and why ECM and corporate broking in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as you're going through your career choices now, it's really trying to find a balance of all of the interests that you've got as you've come through your degree. So yes, I read engineering, and I did general engineering, and then civil engineering. I also did the economics modules. I was very interested in the finance side of things as well. And then you go to the milk round, you go meet the companies, and you meet the engineering companies, you meet the banks, the consultancies, the auditors, and it's really through seeing how they operate, what they do, the style of work they do. You really come to a bit of a view, not a final view, but as to where I think your main interests lie. And as you say, with the STEM background, investment banking offered that combination of, well, I went into the metals and mining team at Deutsche Bank to start with. So understand some civil engineering, going into a mining team. I think I had a lot of understanding and sort of empathy with those clients. But then equally, you've got the advantages of investment banking. It's a very fast-paced career. You're very focused on transactions and helping clients grow. And the economic side of things. So for me, it was a balance of the two, using what I enjoyed in engineering, but equally marrying that with a degree for desire for the investment banking style of work and focus on economics and finance.
Definitely, that sounds really interesting actually. So thank you a lot for that. And my next question was that I see that you went to Citibank and then went to Goldman Sachs after that. So it'd be great if you could elaborate on your experiences at those banks, and if there was anything in particular that you learned within the earlier stages of your career that was of immense value now that you look back at it at a senior position in your career.
Yeah, it's a good point. So my internship was at Deutsche Bank, or Deutsche Morgan Grenfell as it was at the time. I joined Schroders as a graduate, which then became Citigroup. And I worked in Citigroup in London and also Australia. And when I came back from Australia is when I made the move to Goldman, doing UK capital markets and corporate broking, and then moved to Royal Bank of Canada back in 2009. And I think it's really looking at the opportunities that you're going to get as an individual and the learning that you're going to get as an individual. So for me, working at Citi was great. Working in Australia for a new team, still equity capital markets, but a whole new industry, was a great experience, and I learned a huge amount from that. I think when I came back from Citi, it was just time to do again something different, to challenge myself and move forward with another team. As it happened, I knew a lot of people who had gone to Goldman, so I knew what I was getting into. And so that seemed like quite a natural transition. And then actually when I came to RBC, which was 12 years ago, again, I came over with one of my colleagues from Goldman, and another colleague had come over a year before us. And it was all about, building the franchise. I'm someone who really enjoys building things, helping clients grow. So that's what we're doing at RBC, building the investment bank here, adding to the team, adding to the clients, and trying to establish ourselves in the city as a obviously the number one bank in Canada, but a much smaller operation in London.
Definitely. No, thank you for that. And I guess you touched on it in terms of sort of the dynamic nature of investment banking and how fast-paced it is. It makes for a very exciting career. But on the other hand, we noticed that there's been quite high turnover within the industry. So what is it about investment banking that has influenced you to stay for such a long period of time? You mentioned that you've been at RBC now for 12 years. So what is it about investment banking that keeps you there?
That's a really good question. And really, no one knows what they're getting. When you go to university, you don't know what you're getting into. If you do an internship, good, that gives you a taster. But I think when people join particularly as a graduate. I think for some people they love it and they get the teeth into things. I think for others maybe it's it's not quite what they're looking for. It is a demanding lifestyle. There is a high pace of work. There's a lot of stress, but you get personal satisfaction out of that as well. I love it when we're there helping clients grow. So some of my favorite transactions are IPOs, where you work incredibly hard, and we're helping a client go from an early stage business, build their business plan, work out how to finance that. Is it debt? Is it equity? Is it private equity? Is it family office? Is it, in my case, in energy, is BP and Shell? Would you go and talk to them about financing it? And then how do they develop that into strategy? And it's about implementing that strategy. So this is obviously life and death for that company, that client, that individual. So you need to be able to be there for them and to help them all the way through it, which is demanding. But equally, it is satisfying as well. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than helping one of the clients grow. An example there, we floated a business called Greencoat UK Wind back in 2013, and I was there carrying the prospectuses around, helping with all the investor meetings, helping the strategy, helping raise the money back then, which was 8 years ago. It's now grown to be the largest independent owner of wind farms in the UK. It's £2.5 billion and continuing to grow, and it's great to be there all the way through that. But it's not easy. It's not easy, and it does require a lot of commitment.
I'm not surprised. It's not an easy job. Very demanding, but definitely very rewarding, as you say. So I guess following on from that, so as you mentioned, it's quite a dynamic nature to the industry. It would be great if you could elaborate on how you go about managing your stress and what you do to avoid burnout. We mentioned just before we went on the call the picture behind you as well. So it'd be great if you could elaborate a bit on that as well.
It's really hard, and honestly, it's become harder, I'd say, in lockdown, and we've seen that across the team. I think if you're working really long hours and you're at home, the analysts, on their parents' kitchen table. In my case, locked away in the study, on your own, working away on Zoom calls. That's really hard. It's actually become better now. People are back in the office. You have that interaction. Investment banking is a team sport, so having all the people around you, it gives you energy. It creates energy, and it's just simply people to bounce ideas off and to work your way through client problems and to see clients. I had clients in the office today. But I think in terms of managing the stress, it's important to have balance. Right? Work-life balance is really important. So for me, there's my family. We've got 3 young girls. That's all very key focus of my life. But it's also things like the running, and that's something that is for me. I get to take my time off. I go for running. I run marathons, ultra marathons. I should be going to the Sahara on Friday to run the Marathon des Sables. And it gives you a great release, and actually you can do things with clients. There were lots of clients at this event that we hosted. So it's a good social thing to do with clients as well. But I think you've got to have that balance. You can't just plow away and work. The hours can be 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. We tried not to be like that. I think we try to make sure people have a break and people do take their holidays. And when people are on holiday, we do want to make sure that people do get that time to turn off. That's something that's changed a lot in the industry, I think, over the last few years. But there's still more to go. We would far prefer that there was less turnover. But equally, some of it is, to the point earlier, people understanding what they want to do. And they might like the idea, the concept of investment banking, but they may not like the reality of kind of what you need to put into it to make it work.
Definitely. No, some great points you've mentioned there. So thank you for that. And I guess changing tack slightly now, you mentioned that your role as head of energy in EMEA is quite an interesting one. And you mentioned one of the projects that you've been working on. So what was it about the energy sector that made you want to specialize in this area initially?
Yeah, I find energy fascinating and have done right from reading engineering at Cambridge. And it's such a dynamic industry, and it's fascinating how it has changed. So when we floated our wind client, Greencoat, back in 2013, there wasn't too much appetite for renewables. We got the same question every time of, well, that wind turbine, well, the government will take away the subsidies, or don't buy any of the offshore wind farms because they're built in the sea and they'll rust and fall over. And then the flip side of that is we were doing a huge amount of oil and gas work, raising money for everyone, Nigerian oil and gas companies. We did a lot in Indonesia, a lot through Africa, a lot in the North Sea, as you might imagine. But it's always changing. So now, of course, tables are completely turned, and we spend much more of our time focusing on wind, solar, battery, smart meters, energy efficiency, and we've floated businesses in all of those different sub-verticals. Whereas on oil and gas, we're much more focused on helping those big energy majors, the Shells and BPs of this world, with the transition. We are still going to need hydrocarbons for decades to come, and that is the reality, and that's why the oil price is $80 on the screen at the moment. But we've got to wean ourselves off that. And that means moving more into renewables and helping those companies reallocate their capital. So, for example, our renewables M&A colleagues spend a lot of time advising a BP, a Shell, or Eni recently into buying UK North Sea offshore wind farms. So that's how they need to reallocate the capital to drive the production of energy in the decades to come. So it's always changing, and I like that. It's always evolving.
Definitely. No, thank you for that. And really interesting points there once again. I guess following on from that, I guess you touched on it slightly, but it would be great if you could elaborate on this a bit further. But given the changing nature of energy and the energy industry in particular, are there any opportunities or challenges that this may pose on investment banks moving forwards?
Yeah, that's it's a difficult area. So RBC is the largest Canadian bank. Clearly, we are supporting the Canadian and also the US oil and gas companies, and we lend to them. I think we are in the top 5 lenders to oil and gas companies. What we are doing, though, is being much more selective. So there's certain names. If certain companies are not, shall we say, getting with the program and driving towards net zero, then those are names that we will step back from. And we would focus our efforts and our capital on companies that are moving towards the transition. But as I said, it is going to be decades, and we still need oil and gas in particular, looking at some of the issues we have in the UK right now. But it does create pressures, and the hurdle, I would say, for helping a company that's purely focused on oil and gas has become much higher. And we spend far more of our time, and that's where the market is as well, and that's where the receptivity of investors is with companies focused on energy transition. So it's one of the things, I think you touched on it earlier, why am I in equity capital markets? Why do I like it? Because it's always changing. The market's view is always changing. It's always evolving. And it's about finding the businesses and helping them tap that market and grow.
Definitely. No, sounds like a very interesting area, and you're almost persuading me to go into it myself. But I guess then changing tack slightly from the energy side of things, I guess we touched on this slightly earlier as well, that during the pandemic, there's been a shift more towards virtual meetings and client interactions and the challenges that this has posed on investment banks and the work-life balance. So how has this changed your approach to managing client relationships? And do you believe that there are certain elements of this virtual trend that are here to stay for the long term?
Yes, it's going to be a mix. We are not going to go back to how things were before, but equally, people want to move on from how it has been for the last 18 months. We have got clients that we've never met. So clients where we went into a pitch process, a beauty parade, and we won the client back during lockdown, and we've taken them on board. We've raised money for them. We've spent hours and hours with them on Zoom, but never met them in person. That is unusual. And I think you'll see, Jamie Dimon made various comments that the way you win clients is building relationships, and you need to go and see people to do that. So going forward, there are going to be less meetings, but if you want to win the next IPO pitch, you need to go and see the client. And if you're the bank that does it all on Zoom, and your competitor goes in and sees the client and takes them for dinner the night afterwards, and you lose, you're going to kick yourself that you didn't do that. But I think it's going to be a mix. The nice thing about the Zoom meetings is now you can do lots of ordinary course meetings on Zoom. You can see everyone, you can get to know people more without the travel. So I think it's going to cut the travel at least in half. But you still need to, every now and again, have those in-person meetings to establish that connection.
I totally agree. Yeah, 100% agree with that. It's hard to build a proper relationship over Zoom, but definitely it gives you the opportunity to broaden your scope of the people that you can reach out to, perhaps because of these cross-border transactions that you take part in, and it's quite difficult to meet up with the client sometimes in that sense.
It's a good point. I can be on a day of Zoom calls, but I can be covering clients throughout the UK, Europe, the US, and Canada in one day. Which obviously you couldn't do if you're actually traveling to see people. So it can be more efficient, but equally that's can be very tiring doing that. I think even the CEO of Zoom said he'd had enough doing Zoom meetings all day.
Yes, an interesting point there. But yeah, my final question then, to sort of sum this all up, would you be able to provide any tips or advice for students at university looking to break into the industry, looking at the age group that we're at the moment, looking into these grad roles, these internship opportunities, and how they should go about doing all of this?
Yeah, really good question. I think you've got to learn everything you can. So that is absolutely, internships are essential to really understand what the role is, and also it just puts you in a much better position when you're doing the graduate interviews. If you've done an internship, you'll understand the industry, the language, what people are looking for. But it gives you the opportunity to really understand if you want to do it or not. But how do you get the internship? So I think on that, it's trying to get to know as many people as you can. So ask friends, colleagues from other internships, not in the industry, the people in the year above you or a couple of years above you. Who do they work for? Which area of investment banking? There's so many investment banks, and there's so many divisions within the investment banks. The only way to really understand what they all do is talk to people who've done it. The websites are as detailed as they can be, but it won't give you a real sense of what each area does without talking to people around it. So hopefully we'll be back in person doing the milk round and seeing people. Absolutely grab those people and ask them, what do they do day to day? What do they enjoy? And if you think maybe that's not for you, say, well, explain why, and ask, well, should I talk to another thing? So if the demands of investment banking aren't for you, maybe you want to look at sales and trading, or maybe you want to look at equity research, or maybe you want to look at something completely different, strategy, accountancy. But you're only going to learn that by having those conversations. There's only so much desk and internet research you can do on this.
Oh, thank you for that really great advice that you've provided us with there. So yeah, those are all the questions that I had. I'd like to say thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it on behalf of CIBS and sharing your experiences and insights. I'm sure that this interview will be extremely beneficial to all the viewers watching this video.
Thank you, Kareem. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.